Hello, welcome back. I hope you guys had a good break. Our next speaker today is Erica Ryder, who leads the UX team for PayPal's internal developer tools in an effort to transform the organization from a development-driven org to a customer-first and design-driven one. The team is pioneering the next generation of DesignOps called DesignOps 2.0, and today she'll be walking us through what that is and how we might be able to enable our product teams to successfully deliver useful and usable products to their customers. Erica, going to hand it off to you.
All right, thank you. Let me share my screen here. Where's this sharing screen? I haven't used Zoom in a long time, so share screen and the green button. That's convenient. Okay. Okay. Move everything out of my way so I can see here. Okay, so yes, I'm Erica Ryder. I am a senior manager at PayPal. I lead the UX team for EPX. We're responsible for all the tools and platforms used to build and run PayPal's business. Oops.
I think you're muted.
I'm muted. Am I muted now?
No, that's perfect.
Okay. So yeah, so like I said, well, I don't know if you heard it before. I'm Erica. I lead the user experience team for our tools and platforms experience at PayPal. We're part of the CTO's organization, and we're responsible for all the tools and platforms that are used to build and run PayPal's business. We're a really small design organization. We have 5 designers, including myself as a manager. We cover teams across 4 different time zones. We work pretty much 24 hours a day. We work with teams that are working 24 hours a day, and 60 to 100 products, over 1,000 developers, and over 3,000 people, including our regular full-time employees and our contractors. So you can see there's a little bit of a balance issue here. For us to get to that 1 to 10 design to developer ratio in an internal organization was really unrealistic. To deliver the UX we wanted to, we knew we had to innovate, and we had to figure out ways to scale design without adding a bunch of designers here. When I joined PayPal in 2018, you see a couple images here. This was kind of what the landscape looked like. It was cognitive overload for our developers and our developer tools, and it was just killing any kind of productivity. We had somewhere, we don't even really know, somewhere around 100 different products. No 2 products looked the same. The navigation model between all the products was different. A single workflow would process across 3 different products. Like this actually here is one workflow the user needs to go through across 3 different products. And you can see they look different. The information architecture is different. The interaction patterns are different. They have really weird names that don't have anything to do with the products that they serve, like Genesis and Altus and Sherlock. I guess Sherlock is a monitoring tool. So yes, I guess that sort of makes sense. But you know, you're doing all this context switching. You have all these different tools, different tool names. They're completely different. When you switch from one tool to another tool, you don't move in context. So you have to kind of start over from scratch again. And this was a real nightmare. And the development cycle was really long and really strenuous for our internal developers. So in 2018, right, when I joined, I was brought on to work on this new concept for PayPal called the PayPal Console. And this was meant to be a unified platform, meaning where we had all these disparate tools, we had to have one single place for our developers to go to where they could actually do end-to-end workflows. Everything was in one consistent place here. One issue was that some of our tools that we had for deploying applications into the cloud previously were built by one team, and it was very monolithic. And there was a lot of overhead from the one team and lots of bottlenecks because it was one team doing the development. So they wanted to do federated development. Well, in my experience, trying to do federated development and have a cohesive user experience is really really challenging. And if you notice before, none of those screens not only look the same, but none of them look like they were PayPal products. And so it creates a real kind of disjointed feeling for our internal developers that they are actually part of PayPal, a company, part of a community of PayPal, and that PayPal actually cares about what they're doing and cares about their well-being here. And so this internal platform had to look like it was a PayPal product. It had to make all of our internal tools look like a PayPal product, have consistency across them, and be able to build understandable, usable, useful workflows, and support federated development. So that led us to kind of take on this mantra for what does our design team do? Well, we can't scale design with 5 designers across 100 development teams. So really, our mantra and our working model is to enable product teams to successfully deliver useful and usable products. This means that we have to provide the tools like UXPIn and some other things, the environment. We have to work with these teams to help them actually understand what they're doing and how to build useful and usable products. And we have to actually empower them to do the design on their own. At the same time, while we're empowering them on their own, we're trying to remove any roadblocks of a small team of 5 people. But at the same time, we can't just say, hey, here's a bunch of stuff, you can go and do this and do whatever you want. We actually have to hold them accountable for delivering a good user experience. And I'll get a little bit more into both of these topics kind of as we go through here. So what this brought us to was we were constantly looking at how do we actually build these tools? How do we provide this stuff to the team? How do we create this consistency? We started with the more traditional models, design systems that teams would just use randomly, documentation of standards but nobody would ever read, once a week office hours that nobody ever came to. To scale the design, we had to collapse the workflows down for the devs into something that was more like DevOps, because we found that DesignOps was a good process, was a good principle, but DesignOps and DevOps they sound the same, but they were really pretty different here. DesignOps was really about creating this infrastructure for large design teams, which we didn't have. And what we had was large development teams and relatively no designers to meet most of these teams. And so we took a step back and we thought, well, what if we actually apply some of these DevOps principles to DesignOps? And what if we, instead of trying to create this operational foundation, what if we actually try and operationalize design? And so that led us into what we call DesignOps 2.0. And this is really about, like, it's not a design team that owns the design and is responsible for the design. It really is about the design team is there to support and facilitate and coach, and everybody on every product team is responsible for delivering an excellent user experience. And everybody in every product team is responsible for understanding who their users are and how they think and having empathy for those users. And so what you see here, our illustration here really is that we've taken the DevOps model and added design stuff into the typical DevOps model here. So, we have discovery. Discovery is not just discovery of technical challenges, but user experience issues. Defining actually the design. And design is not just here's the visual design. Design is about your API design. It's about your data design and how those all actually interact and impact each other, right? And so definition and design is about designing from the bottom to the top and understanding how everybody on the team, what they're doing has an impact on the design, on the overall user experience. And what is user experience? Evaluation in a typical model is like, well, how do we check for availability and errors like that? And what we're working on is how do we check the effectiveness of the user experience, right? And how do we know the effectiveness of the user experience? It is some metrics that we track on how users behave in our products. It's also availability. It's also API timeouts, API latency, and whatnot. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit here, but getting ahead of myself. But really, we need to scale design significantly and efficiently as possible without adding new designers, which we did. Because in the beginning, it was just 2 of us, and now it's 5 of us. When I joined, this is what our product design and development model looked like here. It's in 2018, you pretty much had a PM, and a PM had a picture of what things looked like in their head. They took that picture and they translated that picture into some words, and they stuck those words in Jira or Confluence or whatever, and then that got passed on to a developer who had to then read those words and translate those words back into a picture. And most commonly, those words did not result in the same picture that the PM had. They had to take that picture and then they had to figure out how to translate that picture that was in their head into code, deliver that to a user. That often led to confusion and not what the user was looking for at all. So if you look at kind of what our model is for DesignOps 2, instead of, you notice in the previous one, there was no designer at all in that model there. So if you look at the model that we have here with our DesignOps 2, what you have is we've got 5 designers, we've got a ton of teams. Each designer works with 5 to 10 different teams at a time here. And so what you have is you kind of have a product team and you have this design development that's kind of in this box, and the designer acts as a coach or a mentor. And so now you have this domain expert, because we don't always have a product manager. Sometimes it's just an engineering manager, an engineering lead, or just some lone engineer that they have an idea of what this should be, what it should look like, how it should act, and they have a set of requirements. So they're not like saying, they're not taking some pictures in their head and translating those into words. They have a combination of how it should work and what are requirements. They take that now and then they go into our tool set for UXPIn that we've built, and they can do rapid design. They can do their design where it used to be that it would take a designer a day or two to work out a design in Figma. Now a designer can do it in a matter of like 2 to 9 minutes, and a product manager or an engineer can do it in around the same amount of time once they've kind of been through some of our training. We've got about 3.5 hours of training videos. So they go through here, they're using the same components that they use to build it. They are now collaborating with the developers. Developers can kind of see how things work. As we're assembling prototypes, not just using the same components, but using the same layout components and everything else, so that we have a really good facsimile of what the end product is going to look like. And then kind of go into this iterative loop of testing it out with some users, getting some feedback, iterating on the design.
Could you say that again?
No, Siri, I can't.
I'm having trouble hearing you.
Siri is involved in my conversation there. Let's take that off. So we get the rapid user feedback here, and what we find is we can really quickly iterate on those designs and kind of go back to this loop. So we can meet with a user in the morning, we can do some iterations on it at noon, and meet with another user in the afternoon, and kind of iterate based on that feedback. So when we're actually getting to the point where we're going into development, the developer's been involved in the process all along, and we're having those conversations with developers and product owners, and the UX lead here is actually part of this conversation and acting as a mentor and teaching teams how to make good design decisions and how to think from a user standpoint, how to have empathy and everything else. The domain expert is the one who really comes in with the expertise on functionally what needs to happen. And so we've kind of switched that around. We used to have designers that we would build them up with a lot of technical knowledge and domain expertise, only to have them move on to something else. And that knowledge was not something that was passed forward. Where now, if we shift this model here and we have developers, we have engineers, and we have product managers that we're teaching some basic design thinking, basics of like how to be more empathetic to users, how to talk to our users, how to put together a prototype, how to visually communicate with developers and work through this stuff. Now, if they move on to a different product, all that design and UX experience that we've kind of given them is something that is transferable to the new team. So as we kind of move on and we get more people and we kind of build out this model throughout the organization, our investment becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. What I see is actually, I will spend a few times with a product team, and then they will come back with something that didn't involve me at all and show it to me. And I'm amazed at really how good the user experience is on what they're doing and how consistent with the rest of our product lines they're doing without a designer doing this for them. So this evolution of responsibilities, it comes in on 2 sides here. One is the evolution of responsibilities for a product team. The number one responsibility, as I've said a few times here, is deliver products with a good user experience or an excellent user experience. And that means that though the people on that team, product managers, engineers, engineering managers, they need to conduct user experience, user research with the UX team. Part of that is we're still in early stages of this, and we want all the product teams to really understand, how do we do user research? not from a standpoint of I'm a product manager, but how do I actually structure different kinds of user studies? What is the best kind of user study to do to get the data that I'm looking for? How do I ask questions, and not really how do I ask questions, how do I listen? Right. So, 90% of the time in that meeting and those research interviews should be listening and not talking. So how do we teach them to listen and not talk? And how do we teach them to kind of gently guide the conversations and whatnot? The other part is designing prototypes with the guidance of our product, or with the guidance of our UX team here. And that kind of comes into what we've been doing with UXPIn. On the UX team side, we've got a big shift in responsibilities where we're not just doing day-to-day design stuff. We're not spending endless hours doing error dialogues with a different message and doing data grids and doing the same pages over and over and over again. Now, really, our responsibilities are how do we actually enable self-service product design? Right? What does it mean to do this? What does it mean to support this? How do we provide mentorship and guidance to product teams, right? Like I said earlier, teaching design thinking, user-centered design, help them understand their place in the platform, because this is a platform. It's not individual one-off tools. It is a platform where users travel across multiple tools, and product teams have to have a really good understanding of actually where they fit into the world here. It's not just, I can do whatever I want. I'm in the middle of a workflow. What makes sense? So we have to help them broaden their thinking of where they fit in the world here. And so for us, it's designing, where we're doing our design is we're designing the solutions at a platform level. So if you think about things like search, if we've got a whole bunch of different products, we can't have search in 100 different products. We have to have one global search. I need to be able to search for an object type, no matter what extension of our platform I'm in. Right. I shouldn't need to know where I need to go to be able to do the search to find the thing I'm looking for. Right. I should be able to search for it anywhere. Messaging, any kind of notifications are something that you shouldn't have to go to the extension to get a notification. I should be able to have this at a global platform level. So how do we build these things? How do we build these models of transitioning between extensions? An extension is what we call these applications. How do we transition between an extension? How do we have shared services that work consistently across these extensions? What exists within an extension? What is at a platform level? Right. So we have to really think much more at a global level, and we have to think about the how does stuff meet the needs of everybody now and in the future. And we have to really solve, if this leaves us open to solving the bigger UX problems, right? One of the key ones here is we're working with enterprise tools, and they've got a really bad reputation of usability issues. And what I really want our team to get to is our customers don't have to buy our products; they have to use them. But what I really want is I want our users, our PayPal engineering, to want to not leave PayPal because they won't have a platform like this at another company here. Our big thing here is actually understanding how we establish that trust is building out real-time user research analytics that are both qualitative and quantitative that are in our platform. So we don't have to use any external tools. This is how we actually hold teams accountable. And this is how we actually we're actually working to provide real-time data and actionable data for teams to actually improve their user experience. So what exactly is user experience? So this is a conversation I have a lot with engineering teams, that think user experience is just UI design and how pretty it looks. Well, a pretty UI is going to make a bad product fail faster, honestly. In 2018, I did this workflow here. I did some user research, user studies for across some of our developers, and developed this kind of workflow. This is kind of like the user journey, and I wanted to create an emotional user journey for our users. Everything above the line is where the user developers are happy, and everything below the line is where they're not so happy. And if you actually look at kind of like where are the user experience problems, it's a developer saying, where am I? What are we doing? I can't find the documentation. This build failed. I don't know why it failed again. I don't know why. And one more time it failed again. And all of a sudden I didn't do anything, but now the build passed. Why? I don't know what's going on. It's just randomly doing this. I have no insight into what's going on. And then I'm getting into testing, and all of a sudden I've got some other service that failed, and I don't know why. I don't know who to talk to figure this out. API contracts that I'm connecting to changed, and I don't understand. I didn't know they changed, and I don't know who I can talk to about stuff. Now, these are things that are actually really impactful in the user experience, but they're not stuff that, for the most part, has to do with the user experience, right? There's some stuff about, okay, well, we need to give them some information about why something failed. Well, that's not something that teams generally think about, and a lot of times they don't actually know why it failed. So part of the user experience there is the team, when a build fails, they need to return some kind of message that says, why did this build fail? And what do I do to fix it? Right. So if we look kind of here also on this bottom corner here, these are some of the things that I have these conversations with product teams a lot, developers especially, is what is user experience? Well, latency is a user experience problem, right? If I click on a button and it takes me like 2 minutes for that page to load, not a great experience. Or availability. If I go to a URL and it just doesn't load, that's not a good experience at all. Right. And if my account gets hacked, that's a really bad experience. And error messages that I can't read. Why are you showing me things that say error code 1578-B1273 failed? I don't know what that means. Why are you even showing it to me if you don't tell me what it means and what I can do to fix it? Right. So that's just frustrating. So actually getting engineering teams to understand that user experience is a full stack problem, and that all the stuff that they're measuring right now, like latency, availability, and security, are all things that we care about because of the user experience. And so actually trying to roll all these things together into the user experience is something that's really important. So a little bit about, I'm going to go through, I have this little video demo of us using our tools here to actually build a prototype here. So a little bit about us using UXPIn. We started using UXPIn to do our prototyping in 2019. And it was in the early alpha stage. And I kind of looked at it and I thought, this is kind of interesting. I went to one of my lead UI engineer for this console platform and said, what do you think of this? And he went away for a week and he came back and showed me some rudimentary stuff and said, look what I did. And it was enough for me to kind of go off and show it to my boss and said, I really want to change the way that we're working here. If we're going to scale, I think that we can do it this way, because the design systems weren't being followed. Any documentation is too much for 2 people to write and nobody's reading it. And what if we don't write suggestions? What if we actually build stuff that they can prototype with that works the way it's supposed to when they build the products? And so we set out to really do that. We have things like, if we're using cards, a card component, we don't allow them to change the spacing. We want a certain padding in the cards. We want layouts to be laid out a certain way. So we have a layout component that use it and it works the way we want it to work. If you see here, this was a page component, which looks like one of our pages. They drag the page component on and everything nests and goes where it's supposed to go. They don't change any of that stuff, right? And so it meant that we could go from doing our designs in a day or 2 days for some of the stuff. If we wanted things to be really interactive and actually work like a real product, then trying to do it in Figma or InVision and Sketch is just prohibitive. When we go out and test this, we want users to actually feel what the product really feels like, so we can simulate load times of stuff. We can get a good understanding of like what is an acceptable load time for a data grid. If you're fetching an API and you're trying to populate this data grid, how does it look if we've got pages where we've got the page loads in one time and different cards load different ways? And how does that look? How does that work? How do people react to that stuff? And kind of clicking on stuff and finding things. We're not sending them down a really curated path. We don't need to. We can build pretty much a fully functioning prototype of the entire product in a matter of just a few short minutes, 10 minutes or so. This is pretty much building one here, and this has got multiple pages, and you can flip through it here. And really, the only thing I did when I did this was there was a lot of time where I was just sitting doing nothing, and I cut those times out. But this is really pretty much the speed that it takes if I knew exactly what I was doing here. And so with really doing nothing, we're getting fully functioning prototypes. We're getting charts that work. We're getting navigation. Our buttons act like real buttons. When we have drop-down menus, they act like real drop-down menus. Here you can see where stuff actually loads, and you can get a feel for that, and you can see how this stuff works, right? So we're not going to our users when we're doing research and saying, imagine a world where blah. It is a world where blah. It just doesn't have any real data behind it. And the key thing here is that previously we've had so many conversations with engineers around how do I do this? How do I do that? Well, this actually shows the breakdown, right? We're not in a situation like the video before where they can just copy code and paste it. Because of the way we build these, we don't just kind of drag things on. We actually build an entire prototype like you would build a page. We use the same stack components, horizontal and vertical stack components. Our console platform, Chrome, is actually, we build a lot of the user experience stuff that we want into the Chrome. So some of the stuff that you see here, you don't actually have to build that into your working product here. Like the left navigation, we actually take a config file, and product teams don't design their navigation. They give us a config file and we build it for them. The footer and the platform, they put metadata into their extensions. We read that metadata and we render the footer automatically. They don't do any of that stuff because we run into problems where if we give them too much flexibility, then they take that flexibility and stuff's all over the place. And I get frustrated and I say, well, let's just take that flexibility out. I want it to work this way and only this way. So let's just make it work that way and not give them the options. So anyway, so moving on here, keeping track of my time here. So we have this whole model of DesignOps, and a lot of this stuff is around like how to enable product teams to do the design directly. Well, we're pretty solid on that. We're working on our second version of our toolkit because a lot of the tools that we have in UXPIn were built in 2019. And they were built for me as an early concept of like, hey, I can do this, right? It cuts my time down doing this. It cuts my design team's time doing down this, but really figuring out how do we hand this out to product managers, it meant like, okay, well, we have to redesign some of this stuff because product managers aren't really going to think in JSON. So we have to take CSV parsing. So we have to have them be able to do stuff in Excel and export it into a CSV and paste it in here and have it work here. So we're pretty good on that, but stuff is old and crufty, and there's been a lot of changes in UXPIN, a lot of changes in the way we've done stuff, and we need to update stuff. So the other three parts here really are around user research and how do we operationalize user research, and that's really the big thing we're working on right now here. So developing understanding of the user and measuring success of the UX and holding product teams accountable. These are all about how do we measure the success of UX first. And then we can apply that to holding product teams accountable and helping them actually understand the users. If we understand kind of what's going on from what they built, we can kind of help them pinpoint research they need to do and the users they need to contact. And holding them accountable is probably one of the key things here. And this is kind of a little bit about accountability here, is the way that it's traditionally been is you have a UX team that has zero control over the user experience that's actually delivered to the user, but they have 100% accountability. And you have a development team that has zero accountability for the UX delivered to users, but 100% control. And so to actually get to where you're delivering a good product with a good user experiences, you have to balance this out, right? The UX team has to have maybe has to have a little more control, or whoever has the control over the UX delivered has to have the accountability too. And so, in our world, UX is helping the dev team to deliver a better user experience, but that dev team has to have 100% accountability in what's actually delivered. To have 100% accountability, they have to be measured on the success of the user experience. And so that's kind of that's kind of where we're at right now. Right here, a little bit about measuring the success of our user experience here. Last year we created a kind of proof of concept in a wizard component. And this wizard component was one that a product team could pick it up and they kind of fill things out and automatically builds the steps, and it automatically makes the next and previous buttons enable and disable. So they don't need to do all this stuff, and it automatically tracks it and everything else. And one of the things that we did extra was we actually added in metrics so that we can understand the user behavior or track some user success rates here. And so, so some of the things that we can actually track in this component, we can track the time to complete and drop-off rates. So we know how many steps are in this wizard. We know how long it takes to complete each step. We know how long it takes to complete the entire workflow. We know the percentage of people that dropped off of this without completing it. We know which step took the longest to complete. We know which step has the highest drop-off rates. So now, now it's just a matter of plotting this stuff and being able to go back to a product team and say, hey, you know what? This workflow took 6 minutes, and of that 6 minutes, it's across 5 steps, and step 4 took 4.5 minutes. And it had 90% of your drop-offs rates, which were 25% of the overall people who entered this wizard. So we can say, hey, you know what, this step here is really a problem. And then we're working to be able to do interrupts. So when somebody drops off at that step, we can say, hey, we see we're having a problem here with this across lots of users. Can you provide us some feedback here on what's going on and how do we improve this? And then we can target that user research. And we can also test that release over, or we're working to test that release over release. So if we know the time to complete, the average time to complete, the average drop-off rate, then we want to be able to put a kind of a bookmark and be able to say, moving forward, is this gone up or down? So to support our product teams here, we've created over 3.5 hours of training videos for them to work with. We have over 63 prototyping components. Our office hours are done differently. We don't do an hour a week, but we actually have a portal where users can come and sign up and they can specify what they need. And they can specify what they need and it will book office hours from one of the people on my team here. There's some demos here of building prototypes, some examples of our training videos. And Anthony, one of the people on my team, wrote this great article where he talked about UXPIn versus Figma building the same prototype. My last thing here, are we putting UX designers out of work? No, we're not putting them out of work because that's the biggest question I get. We are allowing them to focus on the bigger pictures, make a larger impact, and focus on innovation from a user's perspective instead of innovating on individual components and how things look. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was awesome. And if you look at the chat, a lot of people are feeling everything that you showed us today. One of the last questions that just popped up, which I think most people are wondering, is how are you managing to do all of this work with just 5 designers?
Magic. It's been a long road. Like I said, we started the console project in 2018, and it has been a matter of being diligent and it's really easy to get sucked down into other things and trying to get, we have a large organization that is really engineering driven and they want things done in a traditional way. And our biggest challenge is actually shifting the direction of that boat and getting everybody to feel more confident in what we're doing here. And so early on, it was UXPIn and all the components were built for me primarily. And then Anthony, who works with me, he was on my team at that time. He got into it and he started building more of the components and we started, the two of us working this way, and we piloted a few teams and said, this is how we're going to work. And it took a lot of support from the upper management to say, no, this is how we're doing things, and setting up the office hours. And lots of teams were, we don't do individual design for them. And a lot of my team wants to do design because it's what we're used to. And I have to say, no, we're teaching. You're not allowed to design their product for them. You can teach them. You can spend an hour and you can teach them how to go through the stuff. You can collaborate with them, but I want them to do the design. That has been a long time and it's shifting. Now we're a team of 5 people. Originally it was 2 people. And I originally, Anthony was working on kind of all the different components, and I was working with individual teams trying to teach this method. And I was working with 10 to 20 different teams on getting them to shift to this direction here. And a lot of teams in our world don't even understand what user experience is. And so we only would take on teams in the early days. We would only take on teams that want to come work with us. We take that model today. We do not go out and chase teams down. We have a way that we're doing things. We have everything in the platform. We build a platform to support the best user experience possible. If you're in the platform, we work towards what is the definition of done, right? What do things look like? And part of this accountability is that we're working to surface like the health code ratings, like you have an A or an F in their extensions, and showing all of the dashboarding stuff around the performance of the user experience live in the products, because they're all internal people. So it's kind of accountability through transparency. And that's how we are working to get teams kind of involved in working this way. But it's not easy.
Yeah, for sure.
What I
So
what I found, one comment on that, what I found actually is, we're a small team internal. There's a larger PayPal community, and we, because we work leaner and we don't have a lot of the overhead and everything else, we've been able to do stuff in a matter of months that have taken larger teams years to do, and we've gotten really successful with product managers building stuff that looks relatively really consistent on their own, much more than I've seen where I've been at other teams where we have a large design group that doesn't speak to each other.
awesome. So yeah, so in the field of design ops, there are some people who have come from the PM side and a lot of people that came from the design side. And there's definitely a change in mindset when you're a designer that's a doer, and what you're talking about, where you're teaching and you're facilitating design by people who are not traditionally designers. When you're looking to build a team, or when you're choosing people from your team to bring on to the work that you're doing, what exactly are you looking for? Like, what are the different things that you interview for or seek? And also, like, what kind of training that is different that you're kind of encouraging your designers to have?
It's hard because it's hard because I see that, like, your typical designer I want a designer who's got a good sense of design and spatial awareness. But it's so much more than, hey, I can make stuff look pretty. It is something where you fundamentally have to be able to talk to users and talk to customers and be able to not just understand what good design is to yourself, but have to be able to verbalize that and have to be able to teach that to people who have no experience with design. And so what I've looked for in my team, and I think my team, I don't really feel that I need my team to be any bigger, because I have 4 people that report to me, and those 4 people are really good at the things that they bring to the table, and they don't really cross over each other. Right. So I have one senior person who's really good at mentoring and teaching, and is really good at kind of like doing a little bit more open-ended user research. And I've got a young designer who's really good at doing user research and really good at talking to teams. And so they're kind of working on, how do we figure out, how do we build these analytics? What does it mean to operationalize user experience or user research? I've got another designer who's really good with building empathy. And the illustration stuff that she's been doing just makes me cry. and then I have Anthony, who's been with me from the beginning, who's really good at just taking stuff and getting it done. Right. He's a designer who managed to kind of, when we didn't have all the components we needed, he figured out how to do it, and he built all the components and all the configuration stuff. And so he's just taking on ownership of UXPIn and owning all that stuff. And he works with a lot of different teams and teaches them. And so it's really been kind of like, what do I feel like our team is missing? And it's not the same designer. I don't look for the same in everybody. I look for people who can be open-minded and not stuck and kind of like, well, this is the way it's always been done, because that's a good enough reason for me not to do it.
For sure.
I don't know if that answered the question or not.
No, I think it totally did. You mentioned a lot of skills that aren't necessarily always considered when people are hiring designers, especially for product teams.
They should be. They should be, because a UX team typically doesn't have a UX team has to get things done through influence, right? They also have to understand that the best user experience is the one that they can deliver. So you have to balance what a product team can build with the business needs and with what's best for the user, right? And there's a range of things, and you can't just, you have to be really open-minded, and you have to be able to negotiate.
So one final question. What is the cadence of checkpoints that you have whenever you're presenting, the analytics and whatnot? And how do you present the issues that need to be addressed so that they're, kind of push the backlog or whatnot?
Right now, we're still in the we built a lot of the analytics into the platform initially, and we were running through some stuff where we've got to get things switched over. And my team right now is working on, how do we build these dashboards and how do we build them into the system? And we're up against all the other priorities of the organization, all the like cost of doing business and every other silver coin that's floating in the corner of the room. And so my team has got to take on more of a product role. Like we're designing and building our own products, and we're trying to negotiate all that stuff. We've managed to get a lot of visibility all the way up to the CTO throughout time, and a lot of stuff that we're doing we're somewhat in response to the bigger picture of stuff that the CTO and our chief engineers are asking for, say they wanting. We've already been working on those things, and so when I get meetings with them, I kind of say, well, this is what we're doing. This is how we're going about doing it. This is what I see the issues you've had before. This is how I see you solving the issues. And so we do a lot of negotiating, and I personally do a lot to keep my team visible all the way up the stack up to the CTO and across the entire organization. So I'm a politician.
Awesome. I think that's all the time that we have for questions. We have our next speaker coming on at 12:45. So thank you so much, Erica. I think is a campaign for making a "What Would Erica Do" t-shirt or bracelet. I'm the first investor. So thank you so much for your time.